Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Vox Vomitus. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of the award-winning novel Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series and Pretty Ugly. Joining me today is my Vox Vomitus vixen, Allison Martine, author of the Bourbon books, which includes the award-winning novel Dibs, September, and Move On, Melinda. With us today is the one and only CJ Cooke, the author of The Lighthouse Witches. Welcome, CJ.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to see you again. I can't believe it's been
Thank
a
you
year.
for being here.
Thank you.
It's been a year. I know. And
it's been a year.
What's funny is I think after we talked to you the last time, like as soon as Lighthouse Witches came up for pre-sale, I ordered it. Not even thinking like, oh, CJ will come back on the show and I'll probably get an ARC copy of it. But I'm like, oh, I ordered it. Yay, I love it. And then your publicist reached out and I'm like, oh, yeah, I could have just been like,
yeah, wait a second.
ARC of this?
I didn't get the ARC copy. I listened to it. Where's...
I know.
That's okay.
I know. I didn't get an ARC copy either.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I'm like, and besides, most people know I prefer listening to it. And I was telling CJ that I actually listened to it the day after I got my booster shot. And I was pretty much incapacitated and just listening to it all day. And I apologized in advance if I hallucinated parts of the book. So if I ask questions about things that did not happen in the book, it's because that's when my mind decided to just make things up. So
cool.
I may have had a different experience than other readers, but I loved it.
I read it and loved it. And I read a giant chunk of it during a snowstorm. So I was just like so cozy, like in my bed with the fire, reading this fantastic book. So thank you, CJ, for getting Allison and I through maybe like a being cold and hot at the same time. And for different reasons.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
That sounds like the perfect sort of reading conditions for the book. So
it really was. When I was like, I'm thinking about the cold water and the mist and everything. I'm like, oh yes, it's the perfect book for this.
Well, for those of us who don't have lighthouses to go read in, I mean, if I could, that would be honestly perfect reading condition. Would be a lighthouse where crazy stuff happens with maybe a crevice in the bottom that you could just curl up and read in.
Yeah, but not a lighthouse with bats, because the lighthouse in Lighthouse Witches, it has bats, among other things.
I like bats.
I like bats too, but not like
pooping on you
in my space. Like not the poop. So CJ, tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about you, for those listeners who don't remember CJ from being here a year ago when she was here with the nesting. Tell us a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about the Lighthouse Witches.
Yeah, so I've got a copy of the book as a visual aid. I'm CJ Cooke. I'm the author of the Lighthouse Witches, and I guess this is my 6th novel in total. But I also write poetry, and I was a film academic once upon a time. I'm originally from Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I'm based now in Glasgow in Scotland, where I teach at the University of Glasgow. And I guess my work has always had a slightly gothic bent to it, but I've leaned into that a little bit more in recent years. I think in the past I was a bit worried that what I write is too weird, but now I'm not too worried because my editor encouraged it, so that's good. And yeah, I started writing this a couple of years ago. I've been working at the University of Glasgow for about 7 years now, and I have always been fascinated by women's history and by lighthouses. I lived beside a lighthouse, and I guess all of these kind of ideas about the past and how it impacts the present, and the story of witches in Scotland, and the fictional setting of the island, because Scotland has 900 islands, and I'm
this
really
isn't
fascinated.
One of them?
No, this is fictional. Yeah,
I can't visit. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to set it originally in the Isle of Bute, which is not far from me. It's about 30 minutes drive and then a ferry. And I felt when I was researching, I felt it should be in the other coast. I don't know why. I felt maybe the people of Bute might take issue with me
So you've
using their
burned a lot
island.
of women. We might not like that. That's fine.
There was actually historically there were witch trials in Bute, but and Amy Hyman, who I've she was a real person, and I have named a character after her in the book. But yeah, that she was from the Isle of Bute, but I just thought I'll make it fictional and just not offend anybody.
Yeah, don't offend people.
Yeah,
I will say
I think Jen's having. Go ahead.
I think my iPhone heard me talking about the Lighthouse Witches.
I think Jen's microphone's possessed. I think we're going to need to do a full exorcism and possibly burn her mic. Jen, I'm going to be quiet for a second. Are you? Okay. All right. Try now, Jen.
I know something was going on with my internet. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good.
I'm back now. For those of you who obviously weren't here during the pre-show, I'm having an ice storm where I live. So it should be fine now. I don't know how much of what I said you heard. I think my iPhone and my tablet can hear me, obviously, because I was talking about your book to my husband, and then literally an hour later, I got my news feed was inundated with all of these history things from NPR about the Scotland witch trials. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's weird that this is happening right now.
That or
there is weird timing.
Technology.
I felt a bit weird saying to my editor when they were asking me what I was working on. I was actually a bit nervous to tell them that it was there was witches in this book.
Why? Witches are trendy right now. If you didn't know,
they are, but this was right. It's weird the timing, because when I was writing, there wasn't what there is now.
Got it.
We didn't have as it seemed to, I don't know, it just seemed that witches still belonged to a genre that didn't. I was worried that she might think my book is something completely different, because you always have this worry. You have a book that does well, and then you can't go off piste.
Right. Yes.
So I did worry about that. I thought they're going to look at me and say, witches, what on earth? But it's so weird, because even the research I was doing, and then a person, someone I know, another writer from Scotland, was involved or is involved in the Witches of Scotland podcast, and they kind of started at the same time that I was writing, or just towards the end of my writing period, and I just happened to see that she'd done a few podcasts. They're now on, I think, 45 podcasts that they've done, and they've spoke to all these people, all these experts and researchers. But it was so weird, because just all of a sudden all these books started coming out about witches,
I was going to say, a lot of it I think might be, so much of what we think of as the witch trials and witchcraft persecution was really just the persecution of strong women with independent thoughts and and ideas of their own. And I think the past few years with the Me Too movement, and I know in our country with having the president that we did have, it made women we were angry. And then we realized that we were historically angry. We had generational anger.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I was going to say,
a lot of echoes.
It's one of those things where I feel like it's become the witches that we're reading about now are those kind of witches, and less focused. Not that there isn't still elements of magic, because there are elements of magic in your book as well, but it is that focus on, well, why are these people being persecuted, and what drove them to be the ones targeted? And was it actually magic, or was there something else there? And that was the theme in yours. Yeah. And I was going to say, I don't know the timing of all these books that came out, but I know Once and Future Witches, The Discovery of Witches, the witches are in now. So you may have been like, oh, I'm nervous. And now they're like, yeah, a book that's going to capitalize on that.
Yeah. I'm pleased with the timing, actually.
It worked.
It really surprised. It did work, because I honestly wrestled with that witch element for a good while, because it sort of, I think that nervousness made me end up having to do a lot of rewrites because I held back a lot, and then, you know, I had to sort of gradually coax myself to just go there and be brave. But I did worry, because I thought they might think it's just a completely different book from the last book. We're now going into witch territory, which that seemed, you know, really crazy. But you're right, you know, actually, although this book deals with magic, and I was and am very interested in that sort of in the history of magic. I mean, we've just had the winter solstice, we've had Yule, and I'm really interested in all that sort of pagan history, and the kind of society that, you know, that believed in witches, and some of the confessions are so, you know, how could anyone believe what these confessions stated? You know, it's bizarre. But you're right. The women and men who were killed were just people. They weren't witches.
Yeah, they weren't like what we think of as, you know, magic witches. They're not sorcerers. They're not, you know, they might have been practicing earth magic or earth science, and like, you know, midwives. Everyone was.
And there was healers, and actually the healers were very valuable to society. So something that I find is that they didn't tend to actually, it wasn't so much the healers that they went for. It tended just to be poor people, poor women, and Catholics in particular. So there was a real kind of ideological control system at work. Some people were accused but were rich enough to buy their way out of execution. So there was class issues. It's a very interesting period to study, but there is a lot of echoes, I think, with the current, you know.
Yeah, because when you just said, people were rich enough to buy their way out of trouble, that's not too different than that. Does sound familiar.
Tale as old as time. You know, it's
and even just to clarify, because your book is set in multiple time periods, but the main story is fairly modern. And it's interesting because one of the characters, who isn't necessarily a main character, I'd say she's a secondary or even tertiary character, she's like, oh, I'm a witch, but it's not the same kind of witches, and she's embracing it in a very different term than what would have gotten her persecuted years ago. So you kind of cover the whole spectrum there.
Yeah. Well, I think I was, I mean, not to give away the storyline, but I'm always interested in writing about grief and about that sort of family bonds, and that the power of loss. And I think that was what I was interested in terms of Amy's narrative in 1662, where she loses her mother and her sister, and what that kind of stirs up. And I think there's a few stories, if you know, not that there are great records kept about the witch trials. Nobody was really interested in documenting these people. They were scapegoats, right? So there's not a lot of interest in capturing their life and their experience. But there are some examples that I know of from history where historically the women did kind of cry out at their execution, that they would sort of seek vengeance. And you can understand why, because it was so terrible, and how it affected communities and families. And, you know, when you actually think about the fact that they were Christian, and they really believed that, you know, in the afterlife you would go to heaven, and they were denied that. So their family they didn't have a grave to mourn at. They couldn't sort of, you know, mourn them. But they also thought they've gone to hell. That we
they didn't have that peace inside of them that said, well, at least they're in heaven.
They've gone to a better place.
They've gone to a better place. No, they're being like tortured.
The hope of eternity's denied them.
Exactly. So it was massive. And when you put it in that context, and also when you hear about sort of cases of people who, you know, they would maybe go to the council and seek support from the poor fund, but you've documentation where they'd be rejected because they were related to a witch. And so it affected their whole family for generations, even their grandchildren. So these false accusations tarnished their name, tarnished them eternally, and, you know, also made it difficult for their family. So
yeah,
I just
it's
think
again, it's that like generational trauma and generational grief that
exactly.
and especially in these very small villages where
Yeah.
you know let's say they burn 11 women at one time, and it's such a small village. It is just this monumental grief on a community. And I feel like you did a really good job, like kind of even hundreds of years later, there's the echo of that. There's you know the women who kind of bond together, and you know, for good or for bad, I'm not going to say.
Yeah.
Well, and
believe things for good or for bad.
But even though just that small community feel, that there's a point later on, and it's not a spoiler, where it still is very very obvious that, hey, this is a small tight-knit community and any outsider is instantly noticed, and you can't be anonymous in a place like that. So anybody who's just trying to mind their own business, that's not even really an option in a place like this, which is fictional. It's not a real place.
Yeah, the fictional island. We're not saying anything about Butte. You know,
I would love a map of all the fictional islands I've learned of this year, because I'm sure none of them are real. I would like to go visit all of them. I recently finished watching Midnight Mass, so I'm like, is this a real island? Probably not. I don't even know what coast we're off of, but still.
It was a fictional island off the coast of Maine for Midnight Mass. Of course, I know, because I was like, but it was filmed in Nova Scotia. I did my research because as I was watching Midnight Mass, I thought that would be the perfect island to film Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent.
It would. Like, is it a real place? Probably not. It probably could also double for the island in the Lighthouse Witches. Yes. Although you have to build lighthouses. I'm just also worried. So my kids are home, and if I say lighthouse too loud, Rafferty will come just barging in, because my 6-year-old is obsessed with lighthouses. So it's good that I didn't have a physical copy, because he would see that and he probably would have stolen my book by now and be like, lighthouses. He put a wash basket around one on his head and said, I'm a lighthouse.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's
he's cute. But he's really obsessed with the lighthouses. So I should.
I also am obsessed with lighthouses.
And very differently than him, though.
Differently than him.
You don't wear wash baskets on your head.
I don't know. You don't know. You don't know what I do in my spare time.
That's how you get the curls. Wash basket on the head.
Wash basket on the head. But CJ, you also wrote about something that I've always been fascinated with, is like the idea of like a changeling or a wildling. When I was little, my grandmother, who's Scottish or was Scottish, anytime I would act weird, you know, she'd be like, "You're a changeling. I know you're a changeling because
you are a changeling."
I know, because she was like, "You didn't have curly hair when you were born, and now you have curly hair now. You're definitely not the same." And I was like, so as like a kid, I was just like, "Am I a changeling?
You are.
Could that have happened?"
Oh well, so, I'm glad you like that element. Yeah, I think I'm when I was researching fairy tales and folklore, you know, that I guess it's a genre in itself, the story of changelings, and the idea that, you know, it looks like your child, but it's not really. It's a fairy child, and it's gonna, you know, kill everybody.
Wipe out your whole line.
Yeah, it's a big it's a curse.
CJ, is that part of the traditional mythology of changelings? Because I'm aware of changelings, and I've also heard of other ideas of what changelings really were, and like whether they symbolize kids who are neurodivergent, because it's one of those things where I know a lot of people say, oh, this is when they start presenting differently, and because they don't act the same as they're expected, they're a changeling. But I'd never heard about them being violent, or the expectation of violence.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that either.
No, it wasn't that they would like be violent and kill everybody. It was like a sort of scourge would creep into the family.
Right. Well, because people were dying not necessarily by their hand, but just because they're allowed.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. The story kind of changes, and you know, there's a lot about shape shifting throughout folklore, and I think it all stems down to this fear of the unknown, and trying to provide a reason for the inexplicable. You know, I think that the whole of that society, magic, everything, placing or making confessions or accusations against members of society, and, you know, saying, oh, I fell ill after I spoke to this person, therefore they must have cursed me because they're a witch. You know, it's interesting how narrative and storytelling is all used in some very, very terrible ways. But it's the same thing with changelings. It's interesting that you mentioned that there might be a link with sort of neurodivergent children, and this was one of the things. I mean, my story, I tried to depart from that because I wanted to, I suppose I was interested in thinking, well, why would they, why would they say this? To what end would they say that a child was a changeling? So that the wildling narrative in my book, whereby there's this idea of a doppelganger, and this child might come in and destroy the whole community. I wanted there to be a sort of consequence, a very solid consequence, and the stakes are quite high, and that's why they had to act a certain way.
Yes.
So yeah,
a certain way.
Yeah. That's a nice way to put
that.
Yeah, I know. I want to talk so much about your wildlings, but I can't say anything other than I loved the take you went with, because it wasn't something I'd read before.
Me neither.
So I was just
That's
like,
good.
oh, this is so much more interesting, because it's not where I thought it was going.
Hey, well, that's a good thing.
Yes. So you mentioned earlier you had a lot of rewrites on this book.
Yeah.
Did you ever, in the midst of those rewrites, think, I can't do it?
Oh yeah.
Scrap the witch. Yeah.
Oh yeah, all the time. Loads. I hated this. I hated this book. I hated it forever. I did.
Oh
I
my
absolutely
God. No, that
loathed
weirdly
it.
gives me like solace in my heart to hear when people are like, no, I hated it.
Do you love it again now?
I do now.
Okay.
Now that it's come together, and now that it's had, I've also seen, because you don't know how something's going to be taken, and actually you can really love writing something and really enjoy it and have an opinion of it, but it might not just be the book of the moment, or you just don't know how people will respond to something. So I was holding my breath, and so yes, now I feel, now that it's together, but you spend so much time, you'll know this, you spend so much time as a writer with scraps of ideas and testing things out, and it feels extraordinarily messy. It doesn't feel, I mean, to have this nice clean finished book at the end, it's
a miracle, right? Every time it happens.
It
like,
is.
What?
It's
witchcraft.
it
is witchcraft.
It is, but it's so messy, and you
especially when you have like an entire book's worth of words, and you're like, it's kind of a draft, and then you read it and you're like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, does this even count as a draft? I don't know.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
CJ, I wanted to ask, how many Pop-Tarts did you go through while drafting? I took these from my daughter's room. I don't know why she has a whole box in there. And she's like, why are you getting Pop-Tarts? I'm like, it's a prop. Also my breakfast. I don't know. Do you actually eat Pop-Tarts, or do you just make your characters eat them?
No, it was just my characters. It was a thing once upon a time. They're not my favorite thing at all. It was just, I think it was Clover enjoyed Pop-Tarts.
It's weirdly making me hungry. I haven't had a Pop-Tart, I think, in like 25 years.
If we were in the same room, I'd hand you the other one, but the brown sugar, it's quite nice, or quite fine cold. But I did laugh because we have seen Pop-Tarts show up in pop culture like 3 different times recently. And I was just wondering, did they give you promo money to include the Pop-Tarts?
No.
And if not, you should ask. Or maybe they could send you a free promo box.
You should, at least a promo box. Just tell them you might curse them, or have one of your characters curse them if you don't get some Pop-Tart swag.
Pop-Tart swag, that's not a thing.
I curse you.
The Pop-Tart curse.
I think I was also I was trying to think back to the late 90s and having nostalgia for that moment, and trying to think about.
They've never gone away. They just keep coming with new, weirder flavors that you're going, that's witchcraft. That's unholy, and that should be. That's not allowed.
Just pure sugar.
But okay, so the drafts then that you were going through. Sugar and lots of carbs. Did your editor help you take these scraps and then form them into something that resembled a book, or was that?
Well, I didn't. I didn't kind of tell them, the sort of. I mean, they did have a look at a sort of complete draft, and then I got feedback, and then so I tried to, make sure that I do a lot of it myself and not.
So
I need to think
you
it through.
hid the mess from them for as long as you could.
Oh,
So when they
yeah.
Random
ask questions
chapters,
like,
absolutely.
you'll
"How's
figure
it
it out."
going?" Did you go, "It's
Yeah,
going good.
yeah.
Yeah, it's great." It's just
Well,
great.
I just think sometimes it just takes you to work through it in your head, and then I think it's wrong to invite someone to be part of the true mess, because they can't. I mean, obviously, an editor is really important, but I think a lot of it you have to sort of put together yourself before you invite anyone to give feedback, because otherwise they're sort of feeding back on just bits of stuff, and it's not really that useful. So yeah. But even after showing them that first draft, I think I went away and still dismantled it. I mean, I actually stopped tracking changes at one point, because I thought I'm changing everything. It's just all red now.
Oh, no.
So
Red
I
is my
just stopped.
lipstick.
Yeah.
Looks like this.
So how long did it take your entire process of actually writing this?
I think it took about 18 months, maybe
that's
a
not
bit
bad.
over.
It's not bad. That's
You
not bad.
made it sound like it was
It's
like
not,
18
yeah.
years.
Yeah. I know. I was
know.
waiting for you to be like,
I
I started this in 1998 over a box of Pop-Tarts.
Yeah, it
and
wasn't.
I
It wasn't.
finished it last year.
Yeah, like the
I don't
time
know,
settings
it
were all real in terms of when they were written. They were all contemporary.
just
All of them.
no, it just felt like forever. I think yeah, there was just a few points where it felt like I was really still making quite a bit of changes right up to the day that I had to submit my final draft. And even, I kind of just ran out of time, and I just submitted what I'd managed to do. But I just felt, yeah, in a way I sort of felt like I'd failed the book, because I still had sort of ideas for things. And I think I always like swear I'm going to write less complicated books every time. I'm like,
How's that going
why
for you?
can't it's not working
Yeah,
at
I'm
all.
like,
It's
because this
every
one,
time
it's not so complicated that people won't understand it, but there is a variety of timelines and a
Mhm.
variety of characters.
No, but you
Yes,
weave it
indeed.
together
It was
so
beautiful.
well that
Oh,
it's like
thank you.
that. But if you say, was this, if I was told that I could spoil the whole book and was trying to explain it to somebody else, I'm sure I would start telling the book, and be like, wait, but you also have to know this. Oh, but did I tell you that also this? And okay, hold on. Now there are these people, and they would just look at me like, what?
Yeah, that's kind of where
So
I was at. I was like,
there's witches and there's
I need to
missing
write
people, and
something
it might be a
simple.
kidnapping, but it's also a historical
And why
fiction.
was she alone in the woods in the first place? Who does that with the child?
I know, right? I just thought, next time I'm writing a simple book, no complicated stuff
No,
at
you
all.
won't.
It's just gonna be,
Oh, I bet. I know. I
no,
kind of
you
want to
won't.
know what you're working on right now, because you're probably going to be like, well,
well, yeah, no,
imagine.
I'm just finishing the edits on next year's book. But yeah, this one has been quite a bit complicated too.
Yeah.
So not as complicated. I think it hasn't been as complicated, but it by no means has been the nice simple story that I thought I would
But do
end up
you even
writing.
have simple stories in you?
No,
I didn't think
I don't
That's
think
good.
I do.
That's a good thing.
I'm just leaning in,
yeah.
leaning into
That's you.
the
Embrace
sort of
it.
stuff that
I
comes
like
out.
Embrace it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Because we need authors like you, that when you look at your book, when I see something called The Lighthouse Witches and I read it and I'm like, oh, it has everything in it. Like, again, it's not fantasy. It's not horror. It's not straight fiction. It's not straight fiction. It's like, I was just like, it has, again, I'm always like, where does this go in the bookshelf? Like,
Gothic time slip.
Yeah.
I don't even think that's a thing, but it is.
No,
Gothic UK, Northern UK. I don't know, because of where it's.
I think it would
set.
probably be easier if I was a little bit less of a mix of genres, but
those are the books that I think I know Allison and I did last week when you were unfortunately ill, we did our year-end show last week where we talked about the books that we loved the most over the past year. And they were all books that were like, I don't know what genre they are. They're ones that were a mix of everything that were like,
Yeah.
that's what makes it exciting.
And I would have put your book in there too, and I didn't want to spoil it by saying, let's talk about CJ's book before we talk about CJ, because that would
I know, because I was like, and we're both reading the Lighthouse Witches now.
I've already binged it because I was half asleep. I was awake. I was just delirious.
I think if I'm honest, I think that's actually my preferred type of book. Like, I suppose that's why I keep sort of leaning towards that weird mix of genres that is hard to position, because
we call them the end cap display too, because they don't fit neatly in one place or another. And it is interesting because I've talked to authors, and I'm sure Jen has too, and some of them we've probably talked to together, that depending even in what country they're in, they're not in the same shelf. So for example, I was going to ask you, the book that you're holding up, the one, show us your cover again. This is not the only cover I've seen for that. Which release is that? Is that US? Is that UK? Where is that?
US.
Okay. So I think the other one that I've seen that I actually think is a really cool cover too. Do you hear that one too?
Not a ton. Sorry.
It's okay.
CJ.
It's prop comedy. I have all my prop comedy. I'm lighting up today. I don't even know what I'm doing. But you have a different cover. I'm assuming yours is still, it's classified the same, but I interviewed Shelley Parker Chan, who wrote She Who Became the Sun, and her book is fantasy here in the US, but in the UK, I have people who are telling me it's found on the historical shelves, and there they have like included in there's actually some historical notes in there, and it's just taken in a different way. Exact same book though, as far as content. Yeah. So it's like, a book can be shelved in different places depending on the audience and maybe what they think the audience, what's more popular, what's more likely to get it to sell. Even the cover design, like why would they do different covers? Do they think people here have a different aesthetic preference?
I probably think that people in the United States need it to be more like flashy.
Yeah,
and
I don't know.
Just in your face, like, look, it's a lighthouse. Like, oh, I get it.
Like the graphic I made for the show where it's like, there is a lighthouse. Do you need the word lighthouse written below it? This is a lighthouse, a little arrow. Like people here don't know anymore.
Yeah, for some people who go, what is a lighthouse?
Well, and
it is interesting how the covers differ.
And I was even going to ask the title. I love the title because it's punchy, but there's so many different titles that could work for this book because, I mean, is this book, are these the Lighthouse Witches? Well, they're involved, but is it really their story?
Yeah, I know. It was originally going to be called The Wild Thing, and that's what it was called for forever.
I would have bought that too.
I would have bought it too. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, I would have purchased that as well.
I guess
it would have been another automatic.
But
if they want it to be kind of they want.
But if witches are in the zeitgeist right now, it's like you wrote it and you weren't sure about witches, and then by the time it's released, witches are everywhere, and it's like if you put the word witches in it, it's more likely to grab somebody's attention because they're thinking of the other books that are trending right now, and wildlings. Exactly. They're like, what's a wildling? And they're gonna go to Game of Thrones, and that's a different kind of wildling, and that's what this would be like, actual bear fur, and they're running around, and you're like, that's not what I'm going for either. Yeah. So it's all about the connotations, and sometimes they're not helpful.
Yeah, exactly, all of that. So I like this title. I think
it's a good title, and I think it will also, it'll like open you up to people who haven't heard of your work before, like people who are like, I read anything witches. Those people,
probably a lot of them.
There are a lot.
Hoping. That's the idea. Gain more readerships, but and
then go back and find your backlist and work through it.
Yeah, precisely that. Precisely. Fingers crossed. Read my backlist.
Please
read her backlist. Read her backlist. We can verify that. Like that's
go read all of it.
Go read all of it. CJ, thank you so much for being with us tonight where you are, today where I am.
Very welcome.
This morning where I am.
I know. So look at all the different times. It's the perfect like representation of the Lighthouse Witches because we are 3 people from different times. Oh, sharing the same story.
3 wild women likely to get in
I
trouble.
was gonna say witches, but then I was like, well,
We can all be wildlings.
definitely wildly.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, CJ, for being here. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
our last show of 2021. Woo! Yay!
Oh, wow. Yes. Here's hoping 2022 is a much better
It's
year.
better.
I
Yeah.
will point out, everybody's like, have you noticed that 2022, you say it is 2022?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Yeah. Well, no, it's okay. We're like thinking positively.
Like it's a do-over of 2020, but correct this time.
Yeah, we're doing
Do
it
it
correct
right,
this time.
2022.
The universe. Thank you to everybody at the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, including Pam Stack, our executive producer, Roman Siratin, our producer. This has been a copywritten podcast, and stay tuned for after the new year when we will be bringing you all sorts of new guests and new books, and watch for an announcement soon on the Vox Vomitus homepage.